brothers, one whose name is um, Robert Rodin. You may know him better as Bob Rat, but that is an unkind way of addressing him. Actually, he has a remarkable lineage because he is descended from a great number of laboratory rodents, lab rats, in France and throughout all of Europe. He was very helpful to many who were engaged in various scientific experiments. Robert takes great pride in tracing his lineage back to Madame Curie. And so he has some greatness, and he would not hesitate to tell you how great he really is, largely because of the family background, but also some of the experimentation of which he has been a close and cooperative partner. He came over to this country some years ago. You still, when you hear him talk, you'll catch a little bit of his accent, which is quite lovely. But he came over on a ship and then landed in New York. And because he was rather upper class, shall we say, quickly found that the Lower East Side of New York was not where he wanted to reside. So he went very quickly to move to the Upper West Side, which of course where all the hoi polloi and more upscale rodents do reside. He's a fabled fellow who is much known and appreciated in the neighborhood. And one of the things which he's done throughout most of his retirement is to devote himself to younger rodents to make sure that they have an opportunity to appreciate the better parts of the city, which he himself has explored a number of times, and wanted to make sure that they had the opportunity to see these things as well. So it was a few weeks that he'd been planning this, and then a few days before Christmas, that his grandson, Rookford, was invited to accompany his grandfather on this tour of New York, a cultural tour, some evening, to just see the Christmas lights and to see the better parts of the city, and to know something more than just the mouse hole that had been his home heretofore. So off they went. First of all, to rather interesting places in the neighborhood. Again, Robert being so well known, at the back door, mind you, would slip in here and there. And one of his favorite places, of course, was Moody's Bar and Grill for a little something to lubricate the atmosphere so that he would be able to be more spry as they ran along. So there was a quick drink for himself and something non-alcoholic, of course, for Rookford. And then from there, it was on to a quick dinner at Luigi's. Very fond of Italian food as he is. And again, at the back door where he was not so well served as, shall we say, by sleight of hand and quick movements, still managed to feed himself and his grandson for a very quick dinner, and off they went. From there, it was down to Club 21, very fashionable now that you're in the center of Manhattan, and it's a lovely place. And again, to the back door of the bar there for just a nightcap to make sure that everything was in good order. And all along the way, whether they could pass this doorway or that window, it was a matter of admiring the various lights that are so brilliant and bright, especially high decorations at Christmas time. And eventually they got to their destination, the goal. Where else would it be than the Rockefeller Center, to see the great Christmas tree there. And to be sure, Rochefort was just astonished to see such a massive tree, far larger for him, of course, considering that his size was so small, that the large tree was even larger by his accounting, and it was a spectacular thing to see. But it had been quite a run from the Upper West Side down to Rockefeller Center, and so he was going to have a tough time of it getting back home, and his grandfather knew this and looked after him well and made sure that they started back home. But grandfather, too, has been getting on in years and not quite as spry as he used to be. Always quick of foot and whippy of tail, but did let his guard down just at the wrong time when, yes, as you might have guessed it, Crazy Cat, who'd always had a taste for the likes of Robert, was waiting just around a corner. And if the cat had gotten the rat and the grandson as well, it would have been a great triumph for him. And just as he popped out from behind the corner, Robert saw it just in time and grabbed his grandson and dashed him off to a corner. And they chased around as the cat was in hot pursuit, and then, big mistake, dashed into the wrong doorway and the wrong alley, and it was a dead end, and there was just no way of escape. And so as the cat came tearing around the corner, sure that he had his prey already locked up and ready for his own late night early Christmas dinner, Robert saw just a crack in the wall, very small, but just enough, and pulled himself in and pulled in his grandson, and the two of them sheltered in place in that crack in the wall with heavy breathing and great fear and trepidation, while Crazy Cat just waited, combing out his whiskers and shaking his tail in anticipation of the glorious meal that he was going to have in victory dinner, as he called it, at last getting the very best of Robert. So, hiding, quiet, still, the cat became a little bit bored that there was no noise coming from the crack. They couldn't have gotten anywhere else. There was no way out. I'll just wait and wait and wait. And so he did. And then, just as he was about to doze off, he heard from coming from the crack a clearing of a throat, and then an even more staunch clearing of a throat. And then he heard, coming from this little crack, an enormous growl. What could Crazy Cat do? But of course, being frightened himself of such a sound, which must be coming from the most fierce of all animals, dashed away to leave his prey for another day. And after a reasonable time, Robert beckoned young Rochefort out from the squeeze of the crack, looked both ways, and then dashed all the way back to the Upper West Side in the safety of their home. But how, would you ask? It's such a small animal, brilliant to be sure, but to be able to make a noise like that, to frighten a crazy and vicious cat? Well, Robert was not only a scientific animal, he was indeed a very good linguist. And as he explained to his grandson, if you're going to live in the city, it can be very useful to be bilingual. And such is the story of Robert Rodant.
All right, thank you. That's great, Ron. Okay, so Angela, do you want to be next?
Angela, you're muted. Angela.
Thank you. I had a question for Ron. Did you adapt that? Is that a piece that you adapted from somewhere, or is that a piece you wrote? Where'd that story come from?
Robert told it to me himself.
Thank you. Yes?
I think there is a similar story told by Carmen Didi. In fact, she published a book. Wasn't it her, Chris?
It's Antonio Sacre wrote published a
it was Antonio Sacre
called The Barking Mouse.
Yeah.
It's set with Spanish. It's Latino.
Yeah,
Spanish.
That's right. I mixed up.
Yeah. Have you ever heard that story, Ron?
Not that I know of, but like you, listening to so many stories, you never know where they come from.
I understand. I do. I mean, that reminds me of a story. So because you mentioned that the story that you had to share was related to Christmas, I would like to sing a poem that I set, and I'll have time for the poem and the story in the time frame, John. So I'm just going to pull up the text for the poem so that I can deliver it properly. It's called Good Night Near Christmas, and it was a poem written by Robert Francis, and he was born in 1901. And I come from a family of women that would cut poems and essays out of newspapers and fold them in thin onion skin letters and mail them to each other, these quotes or lyrics or poems. And so this poem came to me via my cousin, who put it in at the end of her Christmas letter. And it's called Good Night Near Christmas. And this is a baritone uke. I have to take it up just one with a capo. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Hi, Adrien. Nice to see you. And now, good night. Good night to this old house whose breathing fires are banked for their night's rest. Good night to lighted windows in the west. Good night to neighbors and to neighbors' cows, whose morning milk will be beside my door. Good night to one star shining in. Good night to earth, poor earth, with its uncertain light. One little wandering planet still at war. Good night to one unstarved and gnawing mouse between the inner and the outer wall. He has a paper nest in which to crawl. Good night to men who have no bed, no house. He has a paper nest in which to crawl. Good night to men who have no bed, no house. So the story that thank you, everyone. It's very sweet, isn't it? The story that I wanted to share was one that I've not known the story in terms of in my body, but it is a story I have read many times, and it comes from Margaret Reed MacDonald's book called Peace Tales. And the name of the story is Not Our Problem. The story comes from Burma and Thailand. That's where Margaret Reed MacDonald has found versions of it. One sunny day, the king and his advisor were sitting in the window of his palace. They were on the second floor and they were eating crispy rice with honey on it. And the king was using a spoon to have this food. And they were both in the window and sometimes leaning out a bit, their bowls close to the ledge. When the king took a bite and a drop of honey landed on the windowsill. And the advisor noticed and he said, "Your Majesty, shall I clean that up? You've dropped a drop of honey on the windowsill." And the king said, "Oh no, don't bother about that. The servant will get it." Well, the sun was out and any good heat on a drop of honey is going to make that run. And it dribbled down the side of the window and it dropped to the ground. One drop. And the advisor noticed that, and it wasn't long before a fly came along and landed on the honey, that golden drop. And the fly was having some lunch when along came a gecko, and in an instant, the gecko ate the fly. And the next one to come along was a cat, and the cat ate the gecko. And at that point, the advisor said, "Your Majesty, look, there's a fly, and then a gecko just ate the fly, and look, here comes a cat, and the cat's just eaten the gecko. And don't you think we should do something about that?" And the king said, "That is not our problem." Well, along came a dog, and the dog and the cat started to fight. And they were loud, barking and meowing. And then along came the cat's owner, a woman, and she picked up a stick nearby and she started to hit the dog to get him away from her cat, when along came the dog's owner. And he walked up to the woman and he pushed her and said, "Get away from my dog." And then some friends of the woman were going by and they noticed what was happening. And then some friends of the man came along. And then the advisor and the king were looking down. The advisor said to the king, "Your Majesty, look, there's a group of men and women down there and they're having a fist fight." And the king just had some more rice and honey and said, "It's not our problem." Well, the next group to come along were soldiers in their very nice uniforms and freshly combed hair and cologne and shiny boots. And they heard the noise and they turned in rank and file and came over and immediately started getting involved with the men and the women. And there was a lot of shouting and there was a lot of noise and dust rising. And then someone pulled a pistol out of their pocket and just held it up in the air and they shot it. And there was a big sound. And people stopped, they looked, and then they went back at it. And sometime later, the palace burned down. And the king and his advisor were standing outside the palace, safe, secure, standing in puddles of water and ashes. And the king rubbed his hand under his nose and he said, "Wow, maybe that drop of honey was our problem."
Thank you. Thank you. That was great.
Very clever. Very clever. I loved it. Loved it.
Okay, so who would like to be next? Elisabeth. Okay. Go
Well,
for it.
I have a little family story.
Yay.
So it is about some relatives in my husband's family. It was this uncle, and he had 3 sons, all boys, yeah, 3 sons, and they were born less than a year, one after the other. The household was very strict with 3 sons. They were very strict. And this created a really good closeness and devotion between those 3 boys. They were really very united in everything and watching for each other. So this story that I'm gonna tell, it's about when the older boys, the first and the second, they were about 16 years old. The father of those 3 boys, he was the postmaster in the little town where they lived. And to do his job, he had a small cart, like a cabriolet, a cart with 2 wheels, light, and 1 horse that pulled that cart through the town. So he will deliver his money orders and mail and do his job. So this story is those 2 boys, they were there in 15, 16 years old. And they learned that it's going to be a nice event with a dance for younger people in the next town. So they wanted to go very badly. And they asked the father, and he said, no, you are not going to go. You are going to stay home. It's another town. You are not going to go. So they took the answer and they worked it out. And of course, they found the solution. They are going to wait until the father and mother went to sleep. People in the countryside, they go to sleep early because they wake up very early. And they are going to take the horse, the father's horse, and the 2 of them ride the horse in the next town, go there, have a good time, go to the dance, and come home early enough before the household was awake, starting their daily chores, and put the horse back in the stable. And that was it. So it was a pretty good plan considering, and except for the fact that they did not follow, they disobeyed the parental advice and decision. So they did like they planned. They took the horse, rode it in the next town. The party was just great, music. They got to meet people they knew from their town. They met some other young people from the neighboring towns. Everything was just perfect and pleasant, but it went by very fast. And so sure enough, before they knew it, they looked through the windows and they saw like the grayish blue light that comes early in the morning before the sun comes up. Wow, they got into a panic, ran, took the horse, ran the horse the fastest they could, the 3 of them, the horse included. They got to the house, was still quiet. The household was not awake yet, but it was really close to the sun rising. The horse was all foamy with foamy sweat. They put it in the stable. They got the dry straw to wipe it up. They rubbed the horse to wipe it clean of the foam and dry as much as they could. And they tiptoed in the bed, in the boys' bedroom, and tried to calm down. They were also very excited and tired. So soon enough, in the next half an hour, sun is up, Everybody start coming out to their regular routine, regular chores. Father gets up, gets dressed, ready for a day work, goes to the stable, get the horse, hitch the horse to the cart, and in the next second, the horse collapsed between the two hitching staffs. In the house, inside the house, the youngest brother was watching through the window, behind the curtains, and he saw the horse collapsing. He turns around, tells his brothers, "You better run and hide. The horse just collapsed in front of father." Well, see, the thing is, that poor horse, he was a good horse, but he was used only to slow trot in the town, really frequent stops to where the mail was delivered. He was not a horse to run round trip, 16 miles during the night. So she was not ready for work. She was just, she needed that little rest. So that was the story. They learned their lesson. Everybody learned their lesson. So some of their stories are really legendary in the town. So this was one of them.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So, Adrien, do you have a story tonight?
There we go. I'm afraid I don't. I ended up doing a bit of storytelling off and on the last week or two, and so I didn't have time to dig out another one. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Anybody else? Barbara, do you have something? No? Okay.
No.
Well, I do. So let me put the spotlight on me.
I have a little side story. To give that is pertaining to this time of the month. And as you might know, I'm from Bolivia, South America, and specifically from the city of La Paz, which even though that's not the true capital, it's considered to be the capital of Bolivia. Well, that city is the geography of that city is very interesting because it's in almost like you could almost think that it's inside like of a crater. It's like a ball, and towards the center of that ball, there's a river that comes down. So, back in the old days when the city was just forming, there were still indigenous people that they were not quite in peace with the city people, and they decided to put a blockage in a dam on the river, and the river swelled out to a point that if they were to let it loose, it would have wiped out the entire city. So there was a mayor in that city, or a governor, who had a really plump physique, very jovial and rosy cheeks and so on, and he managed to come to an accord with the Indians, and so all the problems in the siege was resolved, and the city was able to go back to normal, and the city really prospered under that man. So in memory of him and that situation, a legend and a custom appear, which is called the ekeko. The ekeko is this little I don't know if I can. No, I think it's better that way. It's this little man that what they do is they make this little statue, either the metal or ceramic, and they added all kinds of things to him, and which is all the things that you would wish to acquire during the year. So it's called, the festivity is called Alasita, which is the Indian word for buy it from me, or to purchase. So so the 24th of January, there's a big festival where all the Indians, they have this little shops where they make this tiny little miniatures of everything that you could imagine. And what people do is they buy one of this little statues of that, which represents that man that's called the Ekeko. And then you go buying the little miniatures and adding to him. And to a point that is like you see, this is full, and there's a house, there's cars, and there's things, and also they put a bit of money to him. So, and the legend says that there's a time during the day, there's this noon of that 24th of January. So at that hour, whatever you were able to add to that little statue, that's all the things that you might have to look forward in the following year. So, and for children, it's a very interesting thing, because even the money is it's a play money, which you buy things with, and then and that was a tradition that will take place at the end of this month in the city of La Paz, Bolivia. And it's the story of the Ekeko, E-K-E-K-O, Ekeko. You can Google it and you'll find more to it. So that's it.
Angela, you're muted. Angela, unmute.
Thank you. Juan Carlos, when you say it's the story of Ekeko, is Ekeko a character?
Yeah, Ekeko is the character who is the that was that mayor who saved the city and brought prosperity to that city, and in memory of that, and that's what they make this little doll.
And do those things represent like what they made to get their prosperity? Like, was it in?
Those are things that you would like to have or possess during that that year. So if you put a piece of luggage, then you most likely you will travel that year. In this case, there's a little house, so you will possibly purchase a house, and there's like all kinds of things, and obviously they put money, so you will get some money. So and so children, and we play with that, and also they sell the small animals, little birds, little chickens, little everything, and that's that would be the root of another story, that because that's where we used to buy our Christmas turkey for the following year.
The one that you would raise?
Yeah, well, yeah, we will used to raise all throughout the year, and on the about Christmas time, then they will the turkey will be gone.
Be dinner. The turkey will be dinner.
Yes. Things that subject that I was gonna have that as my story for Christmas time, because my sister and I will get the turkey, and we'll raise that turkey throughout the year and name it and really get attached to it. But towards the end of the year, there always was a story about what happened with the turkey that left or they flew away and something. And little we knew that that's the meal we were going to have.
They were
until one day that my sister happens to go on the side of the house where we're not allowed to be, my sister and I. And then lo and behold, we found that the maids that had slaughtered the turkey, and they had it raised by the legs, dripping blood, and the other one was being peeled and the hot water, and my sister went screaming, and I went to see what my sister was screaming about, and then I went screaming, and that was the end of our Christmas night.
wow.
Wow.
And the thing is, ever since, I was not able to quite being keen of eating turkey on Christmas
Yeah.
until the few years passed, that I guess the trauma had passed.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that story. That was amazing.
Yes,
Thank you.
those stories.
Yes.
Okay, so anybody else have a story before I start
Of
mine?
course.
Ron, yes, you haven't told yet. Yes, go for it.
As I said when the meeting was just getting started, I'm going to tell this story next week with the genre storytelling of the SAC group. And it's 7 o'clock, sac.org. And you're welcome to sign in, listen in, and enjoy. But I'm going to practice it on you tonight. Growing up, I lived on a place with 144 different fruit trees. That is, there were 9 different varieties of peach and 4 of apricot and so forth. And that meant that from late spring to late summer, there was always something that needed doing in the orchard, and always something that was being prepared to be done in the orchard. So it was a tough life in terms of household chores and things that had to be done, as well as go to school and live your life as a kid. But every year, sometime earlier in July, sometimes later in July, the last of the freestone peaches would come off the tree and be cut up or frozen or made into jams or jellies or given to neighbors or sold. And we'd put the big case carrier thing on the top of the station wagon, and my mother, my 2 brothers, and myself would head off for Texas. It was a long drive for a woman with 3 children in a non-air-conditioned car in July and August. But we got to my grandparents' house and spent some time there. And then not long after that, when we'd been in my grandparents' home in Austin for a while, we went out to Lockhart, where the family ancestral lands were, where the ranch that had been my great-great-grandfather established was. And it was a beautiful place and a fun place for a kid to be. There are lots of things to do. If there was a ranch hound around, we might get to ride on the horses. But mostly we could ride on the donkey, who was a patient beast and never gave us any trouble, but was not exactly fast transport. There were other things that happened there too, most of which I enjoyed. But you may not know it, but it's true. Fish know who the fisher people are. My younger brother, my older brother, both of my cousins, they were really into fishing. And I would go with them. And I was using the exact same Zebco reel and the same bait we had dug up and caught the afternoon before. And my brothers and my cousins would pull in fish after fish after fish, whether we're up in the pond or down on the Onion stream. And I would catch nothing. And so I got rather tired of that. And one morning they said they were going to go up to the pond to fish. And I just said, I'll stay here today. And they looked at me strangely and then bounced on their way. And I looked around thinking, what could I do? Now, my uncle's ranch was in the hill country. And if you don't know the hill country, it's really very hilly. But more importantly, there are small hills around those hills, some of which have trees on them. And then there are stacks, crags of just plain rock, just sticking up out in the middle of some places. One of those places had a rock at the top that we had all figured was going to come tumbling down one day soon. And off and on during the summer, we'd play King of the Hill up there, and we'd go around, we'd throw rocks at it, and we would think it's going to break one of these days, but it never did. So that day I decided I'm going to take down that stone. I went out to the barn and I found a little half shovel and a little crowbar, wrecking bar, and went out and climbed up there and did some pounding and some digging and some rock throwing and some playing around, and then some more pounding and some digging and some, and that's the way the day was going. Late in the day, I put that shovel under there to pry one more time, and there was a crack. And then there was a, and then that stone went rolling down the side of that hill. It was so cool. I was so happy. I thought, wonder what it hit, wonder where it landed. So I went down the hill. I got up close to that stone, was looking at it when no kid's ever been around Central Texas that doesn't know what to do when you hear that sound. You stand stock still and you look around till you see that snake. And then you try and back away if you can. Well, I saw the snake all right. He was half under the stone I had rolled down the hill. He looked so sad. I thought, I didn't come here to kill nothing. This is terrible. And so I took the shovel and I shoved it to the top of the rock and rolled it off the snook, and then I turned around and ran. I was not a big kid, not a terribly fast kid, but that snake was a whole lot faster. He didn't come after me at first, but in a few moments, I looked behind me, and that snake was slithering along, getting closer and closer. I was getting closer to my uncle's house and thinking I'd be just fine when it caught up to me. And then I stopped, thought I was going to die, and it just stopped right next to me. Then it put its head up around my leg, and it crawled up my body and looked me in the eye. And I knew that snake was now my pal Hiss. Nobody was terribly happy about my having a pet rattlesnake in the house, but seeing as though it was so well behaved, it was mostly tolerated. Hiss loved to chase a golf ball. You could roll it across the floor. Hiss would be off after another shot. Never got one away from him. Hiss also didn't mind playing hula hoop. That was the age of hula hoops, you know. They were real popular at that time. And he was the best hula hoop you ever imagined, because even if you missed, he never did. You could be swinging him around like this and it started to come off your hand and he'd twist himself around and get back to you. It was a lot of fun. Now, he had a couple of bad habits. One was that it wasn't always convenient for somebody to let him out when he wanted to go out. And so Hiss took to putting his things into the bottom of the swinging screen door at the back of the kitchen and pulling his way out. And that worked okay, except the problem is when a rattlesnake bites something, it swells up. And after some days of this treatment, the bottom of that screen door just wouldn't fit in its notch anymore. And my Aunt Lana was most upset about it. And my Uncle Tony said, come on, Ron, we got to fix this. And he took it off of its hinges, and carried it out to the barn and said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to spread this turpentine and keep the wood wet here at the bottom of this turpentine till I come back. It wasn't a hard task, and I didn't want him mad at me, so I kept dabbing turpentine on the bottom of the wood. Then after a goodly while, Uncle Tony came out. He said, now I'm going to cut a little bit of wood off the bottom of this door, and it'll all be okay. So he did, and we hung the door. And sure enough, it was pretty secure, pretty snug. But you know what happened with that turpentine? It sucked all that poison out of the wood, and the wood shrank back to its normal size. And now there was a gap at the bottom of the door, just barely big enough for old Hiss to go in and out anytime he wanted. as I said, he had two bad habits. His other bad habit was a real problem. Hiss liked to go out and lie by the side of the road. And when there had a vehicle come by, which happened maybe once or twice an hour, he'd slide out, jump out, pick his things in the top of that tire and spin around the tire and let go. And he'd go rolling down the road like a hoop. It was fun to see, but I kept telling him, Hiss, this is dangerous. You can't keep doing this. It's absolutely crazy. There's going to be an awful thing happen to you one of these days. Please stop. But he wouldn't listen. He just did what he was going to do. I was sitting in the kitchen, when there was a sound of a screech on the road outside. And I rushed outside and there was a truck pulling away. And I looked out and there on the road was my pal Hiss. I rushed over. He was just a lion there on the ground, as flat as a pancake. It was just my best friend of the world, just as a lion there, like I've been a lion to you. My pal Hiss.
All right. All right. Thank you, Ron. That was great.
That story is semi-autobiographical. Right up until the time, the snake ran after me, it all happened.
Oh, you knocked a rock down that did land on a snake?
Yeah, right until they knocked the rock down, it's all true. There was no snake under the rock, and no snake ever chased me.
Okay. Okay. That's great.
Not yet, not yet.
Yeah, there's always tomorrow.
Yeah. Hey, John, I thought of a poem I'd like to share.
Okay.
Just thinking of pets, because he was talking about pets there. I don't know how many, I'm working on trying to get this one memorized, but it's not quite 100% there, so I'll read part of it.
Okay.
I don't know how many of you are familiar with Billy Collins' poetry. Yeah, absolutely one of my favorites. He's been a U.S. Poet Laureate, I think, twice now. And I love his poems. One of my favorites is The Lanyard. You need to look that one up.
Yeah,
It'll just blow
so
your
good.
mind.
Yeah.
But this one's called The Revenant, which is a fancy word for, essentially it's his dog that talks to him after the dog has died. Angela, I think you know which one this is, right? I can see you grinning. Okay, so it's called The Revenant. I am the dog you put to sleep, as you like to call the needle of oblivion, come back to tell you this simple thing. I never liked you, not one bit. When I licked your face, I thought of biting off your nose. When I watched you toweling yourself dry, I wanted to leap and unman you with a snap. I resented the way you moved, your lack of animal grace, the way you would sit in a chair to eat, a napkin on your lap, knife in your hand. I would have run away, but I was too weak. A trick you taught me while I was learning to sit and heel and, greatest of all insults, shake hands without a hand. I admit the sight of the leash would excite me, but only because it meant I was about to smell things you had never touched. You do not want to believe this, but I have no reason to lie. I hated the car, the rubber toys, disliked your friends and worse, your relatives. The jingling of my tags drove me mad. You always scratched me in the wrong place. All I ever wanted from you was food and fresh water in my metal bowls. While you slept, I watched you breathe as the moon rose in the sky. It took all of my strength not to raise my head and howl. Now I am free of the collar, the yellow raincoat, monogram sweater, the absurdity of your lawn. And that is all you need to know about this place, except what you already supposed and are glad it did not happen sooner, that everyone here can read and write, the dogs in poetry, the cats and all the others in prose.
Oh, delightful.
That's great. Great.
It's wonderful.
I love his poetry.
I can hear his voice
Yeah.
in the syntax of that piece.
He's got sort of this laconic rhythm to his writing. It's just, yeah, I just love it. And it always has a little twist at the end.
Yeah. He's fabulous.
So you've heard him read his poetry, Angela?
Yeah, I actually had the blessing of meeting him one time too, and he came to
Mhm.
read poetry at APU when I was teaching there.
Uh-huh.
And I have all of his collections of poetry. I don't know. I mean, gee, you know, if you want, I'll read you one more. If you guys want another one.
Yes.
I'll do the lanyard because
Good.
yeah, that one is just, oh my gosh. Okay.
I have an audio file of him reading it, and you can hear it on yourselves later in the internet.
If you go on YouTube, you can see him reading a lot of his poetry.
Yeah.
So it's called The Lanyard. And this
Oh.
and this ends where in a place you don't expect, and that's why I love it. The other day I was ricocheting slowly off the walls of this room, moving as if underwater from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to an envelope lying on the floor, when I found myself in the L section of the dictionary, where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. No cookie nibbled by a French novelist could send one into the past more suddenly, a past where I sat at a workbench at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid long, thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift from my mother. I had never seen anyone use a lanyard or wear one if that's what you did with them. But that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand again and again until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted spoons of medicine to my lips, laid cold face cloths on my forehead, and then led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and swim. And I, in turn, presented her with a lanyard. Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here is clothing and a good education. And here is your lanyard, I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones, and teeth, and two clear eyes to read the world, she whispered. And here, I said, is the lanyard I made at camp. And here I wish to say to her now is a smaller gift. Not the worn truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the two-tone lanyard from my hand, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. 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 I love, it's just that at the end. Yeah.
I went to the Geraldine R. Dodge Poetry Festival in 2002. It's in September, and it takes place either in New York or in New Jersey. And it's very similar to the National Storytelling Festival. There's over 10,000 people in attendance. There are tents, and the ensemble are poets. And I heard Billy Collins. That's where the first time I heard him read. And I heard Naomi Nye read there, and I heard Stanley Kunitz read. And it was just fabulous. So really just wonderful. And they have a special day on Fridays where high school students come with their teachers, and the poets all share poetry for that age group.
Nice.
So
yeah, I make my my students, my lit students, read his poetry, and I always tell them, you know, if you're looking for a gift to give your mother for Mother's Day and you don't have any money, just hand write the lanyard on a nice piece of paper, write out that poem, you know, attribute it to Billy Collins, of course, but you know, give your mother a handwritten version of that poem. And I saw a couple students, you know, every class when I say that, I see a couple students going, yeah, nodding like, whoa, I think I'll do that. Anyway, so yeah,
Good.
I'm
Thank
loving
you.
trying to get those memorized because they're just so much fun. But yeah, I'm done.
Okay.
Wonderful. Hey,
Anybody else?
John, I thought of a 90-second piece that
Okay.
Margie Brown taught me that's about the day after Christmas. So I don't know, after you tell, I could share it if you want, unless you want to be the closer.
I don't care whether I'm closer. I'll go ahead and tell mine.
Yeah, tell yours. You've been very patient.
Yeah. Okay. So this is from this book of Celtic fairy tales, and the title is Molly Whuppie. And I did a little research on it. It's a very famous fairy tale, and there are various different versions, but the version I'm going to tell is the Celtic version. Once upon a time, well, let me get on spotlight here. There. Okay. Once upon a time, there were 3 sisters who went out into the world to seek their fortune. And the youngest of the 3 was called Molly Whuppie. They walked and walked and walked until nightfall. And after the sun went down, it got cold and they were hungry. And so when they saw a light off into the distance, they hurried towards it. And it was this gigantic house with a giant door. And they knocked on the door, and the door opened. And here was this gigantic woman who said, go away. My husband is a giant. He'll eat you. And so the 3 sisters pleaded, we're cold and we're hungry. Please, can't you just give us some milk and bread, and then we'll leave before your husband comes back? And so she relented and let them in. And no sooner had they sat down at the table with the milk and bread than the giant came home. And he was not pleased to see them there. But his wife said, oh, honey, they're just 3 starving, cold lasses. Let them have some milk and honey and spend the night, or milk and bread and spend the night, and they'll be on their way and they won't bother us. So the giant relented, and he sat down at another table filled with food. And when he finished eating, there was no food left there. He had a big appetite. And he said to the 3 sisters, you can sleep in the same bed as my 3 daughters. And so he took them to the room and tucked them in. And he placed around the neck of Molly Whuppie and her 2 sisters a necklace of straw, and around the necks of his daughters a golden chain necklace. And he said goodnight. Well, as soon as he left, 5 of the 6 girls went to sleep, but not Molly Whuppie. She stayed awake, and when she was sure everyone was asleep, she got up and took the straw necklace off of her and off of her sisters and exchanged it with the gold necklaces, put the straw necklaces on the giant's daughters and the gold necklaces on herself and her sisters, and then she went to sleep. Well, in the middle of the night, the giant came into the room, groping his way around in the dark, and he first felt around Molly's neck and felt the golden chain, so he left her alone. And then he found the straw necklaces around his daughters, but he didn't know it was his daughters. And one at a time, he quietly pulled them out of the bed and killed them, and killed all 3 of them, and set them aside and said, that'll make a great meal tomorrow. And then he went back to bed. Well, Molly was awake, and she awakened her sisters and told them to be quiet, and they snuck out of the giant's house, and they ran and ran and ran, and until dawn. And when the sun came up, they could see this big palace, and they went to the palace, And Molly told the king what she had done, how she had fooled the giant and he had killed his own daughters instead of them. And the king said, "You are very clever, Molly Whuppie, very clever indeed. If you could go back and take the giant sword, which he sleeps next to on his bed, and bring that back to me, I will marry your oldest sister to my oldest son." "Wait here," said Molly, and she took off. So when she got to the giant's house, she snuck upstairs to the giant's bedroom and hid under his bed and waited. Well, at night, the giant plopped down on the bed, and she was being very careful to breathe shallowly so there was no noise for him to hear. And when he was sound asleep and snoring, she snuck out from under the bed and she grabbed the sword, which was quite heavy, and unfortunately made a noise going out of the room. And the giant woke up and he was kind of disoriented and he felt for his sword and it wasn't there. And that startled him. So he quickly got up and got dressed and put on his boots in the dark. But that gave enough time for Molly to get a good head start on him. And she needed it because that sword was heavy. And he was closing the gap and closing the gap. And she came to this wide river because she took a different route back. And she plucked a hair out of her head and flung it across the river. And magically it extended and made a bridge, a hair-thin bridge over that river. And she went over the top of the bridge onto the other side. And the giant couldn't, he was too heavy to go on that hair bridge. And so he shook his fist and said, "Curse you, Molly Whuppie. Don't you ever come back here again." And she called back to him, "I'll come back if I have some business." And then she went on and found the palace and presented the king with the giant sword. And so the next day, her oldest sister was married to the king's oldest son. And at the feast afterwards, the king said, "You are very clever, Molly Whuppie, and you have done well. If you could take the bag of gold that is under the giant's pillow and bring it back to me, then I will marry your other sister to my second son." "Wait here," said Molly. And she left the king's palace and went back to the giant's house and snuck into his house and snuck into his bedroom and hid out under the bed. And that night, when the giant was asleep and snoring, Molly snuck out from under the bed and reached under the giant's pillow and pulled out that bag of gold. But the gold kind of made a jingling sound as she left the room, and the giant woke up, and again he was kind of disoriented, and it took him a while to get his boots on and head out after her. So she had a good head start. The bag of gold was heavy, but not as heavy and awkward as the sword. But he was closing the gap and closing the gap. And she came to that big wide river and the hair was still there. And so she just went right on over the river on the hair bridge, and the giant couldn't follow her. And he was shaking his fist and saying, "Curse you, Molly Whuppie. Don't you ever come back here again." And she said, "Well, I'll come back if I have business." And then she went back to the king's palace and presented the bag of gold to the king. And so the next day, Molly's other sister was married to the king's second son. And at the feast after the wedding, the king said to Molly, "You are a very clever girl, Molly Whuppie. And if you could steal the giant's golden ring off of his hand, I will marry you to my youngest son." "Wait here," said Molly. And she took off for the giant's house. And again, snuck in to the house, snuck into his bedroom, hid out under the bed, and waited for the giant to go to bed and fall asleep. And when he was snoring, she snuck out from under the bed and very carefully got the golden ring off of his finger, but he woke up and grabbed a hold of her. And he said, "Molly Whuppie, I have caught you now. What would you do if I had done to you what you have done to me? How would you get your revenge?" And Molly said, "Well, I would take you and put you in a big bag with a dog and a cat and a spool of thread and some scissors. And then I would hang you up from a hook, and I would go out in the forest and chop down a big limb and come back and beat you to death inside that bag." "Oh," said the giant, "that's a good idea. I think that's what I will do." And so he left to find a nice big branch to cut off to beat her with. But once he was gone, Molly started singing. "Oh, what a beautiful view. If only you could see what I can see. Oh, what a beautiful view. If only you could see what I could see." Well, the giant's wife heard her and said, "Well, what can you see? What can you see?" And of course, Molly didn't answer. She just kept singing about this beautiful view. And finally, the giant's wife said, "Well, I want to see it too. Let me see what you're seeing." And so Molly took her scissors, cut a hole in the bag, and came out with the thread and spool and needle, and let the giant's wife into the bag. The dog and cat were still there, tied it up and sewed up the hole that she had made. And of course, the giant's wife said, "I can't see anything in here. It's dark. It's dark in here. Let me out. Let me out." Well, of course, Molly did not let her out. And she finished doing this just in time because she heard the giant coming up on the porch steps, and she hid behind a chair. And the giant came in, and boy, he had a big branch, and he just started whopping on that bag. And of course, his wife was yelling, "It's me, it's me." But the dog and the cat were going crazy too, and he couldn't recognize her voice. And then Molly came out from behind the chair, ran past him with the ring in her hand and said, "Fooled you again, fooled you again. You can't catch me." And she went running out of that house, and the giant went running after her. But this time, all she was carrying was a ring, and she was a pretty fast runner. She wasn't weighted down by that gold or that sword. And the giant was catching up to her a little bit, but not quite so fast. And she got to the river and up over that hair bridge to the other side before the giant could catch her. And he shook his fist and he said, "Curse you, Molly Whuppie. Don't you ever come back here again." And she yelled back, "I don't think I will. My business with you is done." And she went back to the palace, presented the golden ring to the king, who then married his youngest son to Molly Whuppie, and they lived happily ever after.
Oh, how delightful. Love it.
Yeah, I'm excited about this book, and I think it's going to have a lot of good tales in it.
Who's it by?
So it's retold by Neil Phillip.
Neil Phillip, okay.
Yeah. And it looks like, I think I may have gotten this at the San Diego Storytelling Festival. It looks like an old library book that maybe they raffled off. You know how they have that raffle at the San Diego Storytelling Festival. I'm not sure if that's where.
Or Marilyn McPhee might have brought it to the swap. You know, she always brings suitcases of books to the SoCal Swapping Festival.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Anyway,
a great find, a treasure.
I had never read it, and I got home with it from wherever I got it and stuck it somewhere, and I just came across it.
Fabulous.
That's the way it is with books.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a question. We had somebody join, Anna I can't pronounce the name.
Lingayat. Anandrao Lingayat.
Can you introduce yourself? Anybody know this person? Okay, well, anyway, welcome. Glad you could join us. Hope you enjoyed the stories.
Can I do my little 90-seconder?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so this is a story that Margie Brown taught me, and Margie Brown was confirmed as a pastor in the UCC ministry. I think that's the United Church of Christ. And she has a PhD. She did a dissertation. And her dissertation was about the use of silence and humor in preaching. The use of silence and humor in preaching. And she also once won the Spam recipe contest at the Alameda County Fair, which is up in Northern California. And we used to do some performances together. And one day she held up her dissertation and she said, "This cost $30,000. And then she held up her certificate for the best original recipe at the Alameda County Fair for the Spam contest. And she said, and they gave me $100 for this, which is more valuable." So that tells you something about Margie. And she taught at the Pacific School of Religion for many years. And I first heard her in '86 at Jonesboro at the Sunday gathering, which used to be just at Sisters Row tent, which is a tent that holds maybe 500 people. It's always a small gathering. I heard Laura Sims tell for the first time there, Ed Stivender tell for the first time at that concert, and Margie Brown. So that was a seminal moment in my life. And we did some teaching together. So she taught this story to me. And she says about it that she had a student who was writing a story. And she took one image from the student's story and she developed the rest. So here it is. It was the day after Christmas, and Mary and Jesus were taking a nap. And the shepherds had gone into town to have ice cream. And Joseph was trying to close the suitcase because it was hard with all those presents. And the three kings were back up on their camels, standing at a road that went two directions, and they were trying to refold the road map. Meanwhile, the chief angel was in the barn with all the other angels. And they had a long, rickety ladder that was going up into the eaves and the top sort of attic-like loft floor. And the chief of angels was standing on the floor of the barn, and all the other worker angels were trying to balance the Star of Bethlehem to get it back up the ladder and put it away because they weren't going to need it for a year. And the chief angel on the floor took a piece of straw, picked his teeth, and he said, "Now I'm going to go for a cup of coffee. And when I get back, I want that thing up there." And he left. And so the angels, like I said, were trying to balance themselves on the ladder and move this very bulky star. When one of the worker angels' foot slipped and the star fell, and it smashed into thousands pieces. And the worker angels looked at the floor and they said, "Oh boy, we're really gonna get it now." Someone thought of a vacuum cleaner, but they hadn't made those yet. someone thought of a leaf blower. They hadn't made those yet either. And what the angels decided to do was hide a tiny, every single piece of that star in the eyes of every newborn child. Because, as Margie says, we are all children of God. And it is only wise men and fools who recognize us in that way. So, if we were in a hall together, I would have you turn to a friend and you would look in each other's eyes and you would see that little piece of light. Because everybody has a tiny little piece. And that is the story of the Day After Christmas by Margie Brown, Dr. Margie Brown.
All right, all right. Thank you, Angela.
Isn't that gorgeous?
Yes.
That's really
Yeah, that's
nice.
So beautiful. So beautiful.
Well, anybody else have a story? It's been a good night. Hour and a half
Marvelous
of story.
stories from a lot of people.
Yes, yes. Now I have recorded this. I hope that's okay. I think I'm going to put that in the announcement I send out, that because I would like to start just as a regular thing to record the stories. It makes it much easier to write up a summary for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to share the recordings with anybody who wants them. And I'm going to turn the recording off now. Let's see, where do I do that?
I want to say that I looked up a las citas and I put the link in the chat.
Yes.
Oh.
So